Rachel agreed to marry an old millionaire to save her family from poverty. But on her first night, she was in for an incredible surprise that turned her life upside down. Rachel Reeves awoke at dawn to the shrill sound of her alarm clock. She was lying on an old mattress in a room that had once been a cozy bedroom, but now looked faded and tired, as if reflecting her family's plight. The thin rays of sunlight filtering through the torn curtain highlighted the wrinkled clothes on the chair and the cardboard boxes in the corner. She was 23, and her whole life seemed to be a jumble of failures and small joys that tried in vain to break through the clouds of problems. She got up quietly so as not to wake her younger brother. Kevin was still sleeping peacefully on the mattress against the wall. Their house was on the outskirts of Huntington, West Virginia. It had once been a bustling place, with their father taking them to fairs, their mother serving them freshly made pies, and it seemed that happiness would never leave the Reeves family. But times have changed. The father, Andrew, became seriously ill after an accident at a local factory. Due to frequent headaches and heart problems, he was unable to work. Her mother, Linda, took on any part-time job she could find, scrubbing floors at school, knitting gloves to sell in the evenings. But it was barely enough to buy groceries and pay for the cheapest medical care. Rachel walked through the tiny living room, which served as kitchen and dining room at the same time. The house was cramped, and there was something symbolic about it. It was as if their future was also shrinking to the size of these walls. She poured the rest of yesterday's coffee into a cup, which was already cold and bitter to the taste, but there was no other coffee. As the coffee smoked faintly in her hands, she thought of ways to help her family. More than once she'd heard the snide remarks from acquaintances. "Why don't you get a better job?" Or, "Why don't you just move to another state?" But life wasn't that simple. Kevin was still in high school, and his father needed regular checkups with his doctors. Moving would mean losing the only source of help they received from the local social service. Back in high school, Rachel had been one of the top students. She was predicted a scholarship and admission to a prestigious university. And indeed, she got the opportunity to study at a college in another city, but soon realized that it was very difficult to combine work and study at the proper level. The money she earned went to help support her family, medicine, food, and utility bills. She transferred to a local community college, studied there for 2 years, and earned a basic diploma in accounting. But there were no high-paying jobs in town. She was hired in a small document processing office that paid a little more than minimum wage, and that was considered lucky. That morning she looked at the calendar on the wall. The deadline for the house payments was approaching. They were facing a new threat of eviction. The bank was threatening to foreclose if the Reeveses didn't make the next payment by the end of the month. The sum seemed insurmountable. A dreary feeling of helplessness flooded her chest. She took a sip of bitter coffee and coughed. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she clenched her teeth, trying to control her emotions. "You have to be strong," she told herself. By late afternoon that day, she was hurriedly walking home from work. The rain was coming down from the low gray clouds, but she had no umbrella, only a worn jacket. On the way, she got a phone call from her mother. Linda's voice sounded worried. "Daughter, I know you're tired, but please try to stop by Mr. Ford's house tonight. He's called us 5 times already. He says he wants to talk to you alone. I told him I'd tell you." "Mom." Rachel frowned, quickening her step to find shelter from the rain faster. "Mr. Ford? Is that the rich guy from across town?" "Yeah, he's owned a chain of warehouses and land outside of town for a long time. And he's given us little gifts in the past. Remember when he helped pay for my dad's medicine last year? I don't know what he needs, but he insists you come to him." "Okay, I will. I have nothing to lose anyway," Rachel whispered, trying to hide her anxiety. She tried to remember what Garrett Ford looked like. She'd seen him a couple of times from a distance. A large man in his 70s, gray-haired, heavy-looking, with a solid gait. When darkness fell, she plucked up courage and went to Ford's house in the heart of the wealthy neighborhood. There, tall wrought iron fences lined the streets, and bright street lamps illuminated the lawns of the mansions. It seemed like a different world, beyond the worries and troubles of ordinary people. Rachel's legs trembled slightly from the cold and nervous tension. At the gate of the mansion, she was met by a polite butler. He led the girl through a wide corridor with marble floors, the walls of which were decorated with paintings in expensive frames. At the end of the corridor was a spacious living room with a fireplace. There, in a massive armchair, sat Garrett Ford himself, wearing a perfectly tailored suit and a cane with a carved handle on his lap. "Good evening, Ms. Reeves. I'm glad you decided to come," he said in a deep voice. "Come in and sit down." She looked around, feeling a little dizzy with luxury. She sat down carefully on the edge of the sofa, trying not to stain the expensive upholstery. Her clothes were drenched, her hair sticking to her cheeks. "You called for me, sir?" she asked, almost in a whisper. "What can I do for you?" Ford smiled slightly, and something like fatherly kindness flashed across his face. But his gaze remained studious. He ran his palm over the handle of his cane and said, "I know your family is going through a difficult time. I've been watching your situation for a long time. Your father once helped me in one of the warehouses, and I haven't forgotten it. And now, I have an idea that could solve all your problems." Rachel was silent, a lump in her throat. Her intuition told her that such conversations didn't just end like this. "I'm listening to you, Mr. Ford," she finally said. "I am alone. Life has made me wealthy, but I don't want to leave this world without the continuation of my kind." He sounded like an old man who had seen too much. "Your character, your upbringing, and care for your loved ones seem to me ideal qualities for a future wife. If you agree to marry me, I will cover all the expenses of your family. Your mother will never again work in exhaustion. Your father will be able to be treated in the best clinics. Your brother will graduate from high school, and after, college. All that will be left for you to do is to become my wife." That phrase came out of the blue. Rachel froze, unable to find the words. She realized that she was talking about marrying a man who was old enough to be her grandfather. "Was this a joke?" she asked, hoping he would smile and say yes. But Mr. Ford only shook his head. "I made up my mind a long time ago, and it's not a joke." But she wanted to object, to say that she was afraid and disgusted to even think about it. But her father's face, wrinkled with pain and sleepless nights, and her mother's hands, calloused by the constant scrubbing of the floors, came to mind. "Are you sure that, I'm the right person? I mean, I come from a different social background. Your honesty and kindness are what's truly valuable," he replied. "Take a few days to think about it, but know that the bank's debt hangs over your family and you have no other choice." She realized the harshness of the situation. She might have to go through with it, to become the wife of a man she didn't love at all. On the other hand, this marriage could save her loved ones from poverty and give her a chance to turn her life around someday. "I'll think about it," she mumbled, rising from the couch. Her heart was beating so hard it seemed to be pounding throughout the room. Ford followed her with a glance. When she reached the door, he dropped quietly. "Remember, Miss Reeves, if you make up your mind, my support will be boundless. But you will have to live in my house and become my wife completely." All the way home, she was in a fog. The magnificent living room was before her eyes. Ford's words echoed in her head. "If you agree, father can be treated." Her thoughts were jumbled. She had little illusions. He wanted her youth, her company, maybe her future children, in exchange for saving her family. It seemed ugly under the circumstances, but it was the only option. That night, she hardly slept at all. Kevin asked glumly where she'd gone, but Rachel only nodded that everything was fine and told him not to worry. Her father was getting worse, and her mother was sullenly calculating whether there was enough money for his medication. All these difficulties accumulated, as if shouting to her, "Agree! What else can you do?" The next day, she confessed Ford's proposal to her mother. Linda turned pale. She knew about the reputation of the rich man. Many considered him a man of rigid, though fair. But to put her daughter in such conditions, it was terrible. Still, the mother could not deny that the huge sum that Ford is willing to give can fundamentally change their fate. "Daughter, it's up to you," Linda said, clasping her hands in her lap. "I have no right to tell you, but I know how much you'll have to sacrifice." Rachel realized she always had the choice to say no. But as she looked at the weary faces of her loved ones, she realized that this choice would condemn them to further suffering, perhaps to disaster. And then, gathering her courage, she told her parents that she would accept. On the eve of her visit to Ford, she repeated to herself several times that she was doing it for her family. But fear and disgust at the very idea of such a marriage did not let her go. She shuddered at the thought that she would have to live with a man much older than she was, that he might touch her, claim her youth. But as she made her way out into the street, she was surprised herself at how determined she was to make her way toward the mansion. She felt there was no turning back. When she entered the living room, Mr. Ford was in the same chair as if he had never left it. He seemed even more reserved this time. No smile, though there was a warm tinge to his voice. "So you have made up your mind?" "Yes," she answered, trying to hold back the remnants of her pride. "I agree to be your wife." She waited for him to smile, or at least show some relief. But Garrett only rose from his chair and said, "Then I'll take care of everything. The wedding is in a week. You take care of the outfit and I'll cover all the costs. And one more thing. I want your family to stay at my guest house until we get everything organized. I want to make sure we don't get in trouble with the creditors." Rachel's heart fluttered. Everything was happening too fast, but perhaps that was even better. Long deliberation would only add to her confusion. Ford took her hand in his and kissed it coldly. The gesture evoked mixed feelings: gratitude for her help and fear of what she would have to endure. For the next week, there was a strange atmosphere in the Reeves house. On the one hand, it was as if they had a ray of hope. Kevin couldn't believe that his father would now have the best doctors. The mother, though sad about her daughter's fate, hoped that things wouldn't turn out so badly. And the father himself was so weak that he didn't engage in conversation, only quietly thanking her for her sacrifice. It is noteworthy that Mr. Ford kept his word, paid part of their debts, agreed with doctors, moved the family into a comfortable guest house on his territory. Everything seemed a real miracle against the gray life in a dilapidated house. In contrast, Rachel's soul was torn with questions. How far would her deal with her conscience go? Would she be unhappy for the rest of her life? After all, this wasn't how she dreamed of getting married. In her school years, she imagined how she would accept a proposal from a guy she would love with all her heart, give birth to his children, and they would raise them together, remembering their younger years. But fate had decided otherwise. The wedding day came. She has almost no friends left. Many went to other cities to earn money or have long ceased to communicate because of the difference in status and employment. Therefore, all the preparations fell on her mother and a few women hired by Ford. He didn't want too much pageantry, so everything was kept small. A small ceremony at the town hall and dinner at the mansion. Rachel wore a simple but elegant white dress. She didn't feel like a bride, more like a prisoner before sentencing. During the ceremony, when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, the girl's heart stopped for a moment. She felt as if she had made a bargain with the devil. Ford put an expensive ring on her finger, and she pressed her lips together, barely holding back her tears. All these people around, and there weren't many, clapped and congratulated, but deep down she heard only the ringing of emptiness. Then they all moved to the mansion, where a festive table was set. Ford accepted congratulations, behaved kindly, but somehow official. From the outside, it might seem that he treated Rachel with respect, but she still felt cold. When the celebration came to an end, evening approached, and the mother quietly said to her daughter, "Be strong. If anything happens, we're here for you." But what could they do if everything had already happened? Later, Rachel went into the new bedroom, which was in one of the farther parts of the mansion. It was a spacious room with carved furniture and a huge bed in the middle. The heavy curtains on the windows hid the night landscape, and only the moon barely shone through the fabric, casting a silvery glow on the floor. The girl stood amidst this luxury, examining the marble mantelpiece, the lush carpets and paintings on the walls, all of which seemed alien to her, like a stage set for someone else's life. Soon there was a knock on the door. It was Garrett. He walked in, pushed his cane aside, and looked at her. His face was hard to read. It seemed to express neither joy nor regret. He said, "Rest. It's all yours now. I'll take a bath and come back. Need to recover a little after this day." As he disappeared behind the bathroom door, Rachel felt the panic rolling in. She knew this was their wedding night. The very thought made a chill run down her spine. She felt like she wasn't ready. But did she have a choice? Giving herself a moment, she lay down on the edge of the bed and stared up at the ceiling. Minute after minute dragged by in eerie tension. She could hear the water running noisily in the bathroom, probably Ford washing his hands, brushing his teeth, or changing his clothes. God give me strength, she thought. And at that moment the door opened. But instead of a hunched 70-year-old man, a completely different person entered the room. A young man in his 30s. He had brown hair, barely damp from a shower, and a confident posture. His face was unfamiliar, but there was something familiar in his eyes, as if from Ford himself. Rachel jumped up as if she'd seen a ghost. Who are you?" she exhaled. The man stepped forward, a slight smile on his face. "My name is Garrett Ford, but not the one you married. I'm the real Garrett. And that older man was just an image I used." Rachel's breath caught. The room seemed to spin. Her mind was racing with thoughts of a hoax, a practical joke, some kind of delusion. This is impossible," was all she could say, her voice trembling. "Minus Mr. Ford is an old man. I saw it. I married someone else." He shrugged. "I'm sorry I had to deceive you, but I had to see who would be willing to go all the way with me. After all, everyone around me is hungry for money. I wanted to see if you were sincere. I know it's cruel, but if I appeared as I am, you might think I'm just a rich playboy looking for a young wife. And you might have run away instead of accepting. But beneath the old man's mask, I saw your true nature. You're willing to sacrifice yourself for your family." Tears sprang from her eyes, whether from relief that she was with a young man and not her decrepit husband, or from betrayal. He'd violated her trust and trapped her into something humiliating. You made me believe." "Why?" she whispered. "Because it was important for me to realize who you were. I can see you resent that. I understand. But now I'm offering you a real choice. We can end the marriage without consequences for you. I'll take care of it. Or we can try to build a real union without the lies. Your family will be safe. I truly want to help you, and I admit I really like your courage, your loyalty to your loved ones. I'm sorry for all the drama." He spoke calmly, but there was excitement in his eyes. Rachel felt a storm of contradictory feelings. On the one hand, she was now facing a young, attractive man, not an old man. On the other hand, he had deceived her for the sake of some test. This she could not accept easily. "Give me time," she finally said, wiping away her tears. "I can't forgive or understand everything at once. Too much has happened." She walked past him to the door. He made no attempt to hold her back. He said quietly as she walked out, "I'll do anything to make you happy. Believe me, I have no malicious intent. And thanks for not running away right away." She spent the rest of the night in one of the guest rooms, staring out the window, digesting what had happened. Closing her eyes, she saw this old Ford and that young one. Never in her life had she felt so deceived and at the same time so confused by the change for the better. Who was Garrett really? And what should she do now? The next morning, Rachel tiptoed back to her new room. Yet she sensed that Garrett, or as she used to call him, Mr. Ford, was already up and probably doing business somewhere in the house. The stiffness from the night's experiences made her make every move with care. Taking a deep breath, she cleaned herself up. She washed her face, brushed her hair, and changed into the simple but clean clothes Ford's assistants had provided. As soon as she went down to the living room to look for something for breakfast, she was greeted by the butler with a polite bow. "Mrs. Ford, Mr. Garrett is expecting you on the terrace. Will you have breakfast there?" The word Mrs. sounded incongruous and foreign to her, but she nodded and went through the wide glass doors to the spacious terrace overlooking the magnificent garden. There, at a table covered with a snow-white tablecloth, sat Garrett. He looked young in the sunlight, even more unaccustomed to his old man's appearance. In front of him were plates of fruit, freshly squeezed juice, coffee. It all looked like something out of a rich man's movie, not real life. When he noticed her, he stood up and pushed back his chair. "Good morning, Rachel. Glad you could make it out. I hope you got some sleep?" She sat up, looking at him incomprehensibly. "Honestly, not really. Too many thoughts in my head." "Yes," Garrett agreed, putting some sliced fruit on her plate. "I think we should talk about what happened. I don't want to push. I just want to explain why all this happened." Rachel crossed her arms over her chest, trying to hide her inner trembling. The situation didn't seem real. She wanted to talk and run away at the same time. "Maybe I should," she said finally. "I need to understand why you did what you did. I'm resentful. I made a terrible decision, humiliated myself, agreed to a marriage of convenience to save my family. And it all turned out to be someone else's experiment?" "It's not really an experiment." Garrett shook his head. "Let me explain. I didn't want to get married for money or status. I wanted someone who could overcome my aversion to my elderly appearance, someone who wasn't just there for the benefits. I watched you for a long time and saw that you were different. You had the opportunity to turn away, to find a way to refuse, but you made the sacrifice for your family. So you have generosity and loyalty. However, I realize I was cruel. It was important to me to make sure you weren't just a fortune hunter." She frowned. "But it also looks like you were trying to buy a wife. You may have wanted someone who would love you for real, but you still bribed my family, paying for their medical care, their debts, their housing." Garrett looked away from the garden, where the flower beds swayed in the light morning breeze. "Yes, I admit my tactics are questionable. Maybe deep down, I was afraid of being rejected by the present. But the situation is such that I'm willing to bear the consequences. If you decide to leave, I will help you and your family. No one will take from you what I've already paid for. I won't be your jailer. I just hope that once you really get to know me, you'll realize I'm not a monster." A light flame of hope flickered in Rachel's soul. At least he was promising to give her freedom of choice. And if his words are to be believed, he's not going to destroy what he's already done for her family. But the wound of deceit was still there. "Let me stay for now," she finally said, struggling to find the words. "But I'm not making any promises about our marriage. I need to sort out my feelings. I don't know you as a man, only as a liar who pretended to be an old man. So let's live under the same roof, see how we communicate. But please, no pressure, and no secrets." Instead of answering, Garrett nodded slowly and poured her coffee. "Okay. I'll understand and accept whatever you decide. Hopefully, time will help us work things out." That was the end of breakfast. An awkward silence hung in the air like fog in a morning garden. Rachel didn't know which felt stronger, relief or annoyance. On the one hand, he offered a choice and demonstrated that he wasn't keeping her in a golden cage by force. On the other hand, it was hard to forget the bitterness she had felt over the past few days. When she returned to the house, she saw her mother, who, judging by her confused look, already knew what had happened. Apparently, Ford had seen fit to share it with her or her father so as not to scare her unnecessarily. Linda bit her lips nervously and wrinkled the hem of her dress. "Daughter, how are you?" Honestly, I don't know, Rachel sighed, sinking down on the couch. I didn't expect this situation from myself. Our poverty made me agree. And now suddenly it turns out that he's young. It's all so confusing. Her mother took her hand. Did he say he wouldn't take the help if you decided to leave? Yes, the girl confirmed, offering me freedom so I don't feel like he bought me. Linda smiled tiredly. Maybe he's not a bad man after all. Anyway, you don't have to hurry. Live here, watch. If anything goes wrong, come back to us, we'll figure it out together. Although now we're in his guest house. She faltered, realizing the irony. The family depended on Ford's generosity and lived on his property. In the meantime, the father had been treated at the clinic, and the doctors noted that the timely therapy had helped stabilize his condition. Kevin, for the first time in a long time, looked calm. He was able to fully concentrate on his studies without running on part-time jobs. All this was perceived in the family as a miracle. But for Rachel, every day was a struggle with contradictions. A few days later, Garrett suggested that they go into town together to shop. He explained that he was used to doing things on his own and was often at the office, but he found time to spend the day with her. She agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to get to know him better. On the way, they talked about nothing. The weather, the fact that her brother liked math, that her father was afraid of doctors. Garrett listened attentively. Sometimes he asked clarifying questions. There was no arrogance in his demeanor. He spoke to her as an equal, and that was a good thing. But the moments of deception came back to her mind, making her tense. They stopped at the mall. Garrett wanted to buy her new clothes, since the old ones were barely fit for a noble outing. Rachel felt awkward as he held up the pretty dresses in front of her and asked, "How about this one?" The courteous glances of the counselors made her heart sink. Did they really think she was his kept woman? But Garrett seemed to understand her embarrassment and didn't insist on ostentatious glamour. In the end, she chose a few simple but quality items, and he paid for them without blinking. At the register, she whispered in a barely audible voice, "Will I ever be able to pay you back?" "It's not a debt," he answered quietly, without turning to the cashier. "I'm not buying your favor. If it makes you feel better to think that you can pay me back, consider it an investment in our possible life together." The girl's heart trembled. The words sounded sincere, albeit a little high-minded. She didn't know how to react anymore. Sometimes he seemed to her just a generous guy, other times, a cynical manipulator. She needed more time to form a firm opinion of him. At the cosmetics store, he lingered at the shampoo shelves and said with an embarrassed grin, "I'm sorry, I don't know much about women's stuff. Can you tell me what to buy?" Rachel looked at him in surprise. "Why do you need shampoo for women? What if you need some kind of special care? I thought maybe it was all part of your personal space." She just sighed. "Garrett, I don't need you to control every little thing. It's enough that I can choose for myself. Keep it simple." He smiled. "Okay, I'll study." By evening, they were tired of shopping and decided to have a bite to eat at a small cafe. They sat at a table by the window and talked quietly. Every time Rachel looked at his face, it was as if two voices were fighting inside her. One said, "He's kind and considerate. He's helped your family. Maybe we should give him a chance." The other was screaming, "He lied. He left you in the dark. How can you trust him so quickly?" Eventually, she was sinking into a deafening silence. Garrett noticed it, but he didn't try to press her, only occasionally asking her what she'd done before the wedding, what music she liked, what she dreamed about as a child. "When I was 9, she said, staring into her teacup, "I dreamed of being a veterinarian. I love animals. We had a dog then, Baxter. He died of an illness, and I swore I'd treat his kind. But reality took its toll." "Maybe you'll get another chance," Garrett said. "If you want to study further, I said. "I can do it on my own," she interrupted sharply. "I'm sorry, it's just, I don't want to feel obligated again." His eyes flashed with resentment, but he held it back. I understand. I won't mention it again. After dinner, he drove her home, and they were silent the whole way. When they reached the mansion, she got out of the car and immediately heard her brother's cheerful voice. "Rachel, they're waiting for you." It turned out that her parents were in the guest house. Her father looked a little more awake, though he was still pale. He was sitting in a chair with his arm around her shoulders and smiled at the sight of her daughter. "How was your trip?" She briefly recounted the day, mentioning the stores and cafes. She omitted the details of the tense conversation with Garrett. She didn't want to alarm them further, but Kevin noticed the grim expression on her face. "Hey, is everything okay?" "I'm just tired," she said, trying not to broach the subject. A whole week went by like that. Every day, Rachel tried to get used to the idea that she was technically Garrett's wife, but in fact, they lived like neighbors. He offered her various ways to spend time together. A small picnic, a trip to a museum, or a movie. Sometimes she agreed, sometimes she refused, citing a bad mood. Garrett tried not to take offense, but Rachel could see the sadness in his eyes when she avoided his attempts at intimacy. The first time she'd felt warm affection for him was the moment he'd met her father returning from the clinic. Garrett had insisted on picking him up, helped him carry his luggage, put him in the car, asked him what medication he needed. My father was embarrassed. He knew only Old Man Ford and was surprised to see a young man who introduced himself as grandson. He had to explain that the grandfather had left, and the young man was now in charge of the household. No one wanted to disturb the sick man with details. Garrett himself played the part of the grandson, which seemed absurd but convincing. When they returned, Rachel asked him in a whisper, "Why are you doing this? Aren't you tired of lying?" He replied calmly, "I don't want your father to be upset. I'm afraid the truth might make him feel worse. Let's make him feel better now. We'll tell him later." Rachel nodded silently. Their little secret was becoming a huge knot of innuendo, but it seemed to be the best way out. Kevin knew the truth, of course, but supported his sister, realizing how hard every day was for her. Step by step, tiny bridges of understanding were built between Rachel and Garrett. She noticed that he respected her boundaries, stayed out of her way when she was depressed. He saw her caring for her loved ones, trying to cook them dinner or work in the garden, ignoring the staff of servants. When they crossed paths in the corridors, he smiled, sincere but slightly embarrassed, as if he was afraid of scaring her off. One evening, with the rain pouring down and the wind slamming the shutters, Rachel sat in the mansion's library. She wandered between the shelves, trying to distract herself from her troubling thoughts. Suddenly, Garrett entered quietly with a book in his hands. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "You like history, don't you? I found this rare edition on Indian settlements. I thought you might be interested." She took the book, glanced at the cover, and was surprised to see that it was rare. She smiled quietly. "Thank you. I'm not asking for anything in return," he added. "I just want you to enjoy it, and if you ever decide to talk, I'm here for you." For a moment, she wanted to hug him, to release the pain that had built up over time. But fear and pride stopped her. She thanked him and stayed alone. At night, sheltered by the silence, she thought for the first time, what if he really isn't a monster? The new reality was slowly becoming familiar. However, the relationship between Rachel and Garrett remained strained. They behaved politely to each other, like business associates avoiding personal topics. Meanwhile, Rachel's father was recovering. Her brother was studying for his final exams, and her mother was happily setting up the guest house, filling it with a home-like atmosphere. One evening, Garrett suggested that the family gather for dinner in the main dining room of the mansion. Although his father preferred peace, he agreed, for Garrett introduced himself as Old Ford's grandson, and he wanted to know who it was that was helping the family so actively. At the richly set table, there was friendly conversation about the weather, about Kevin's progress at school, about how the flowers were growing in the garden. The servants brought the dishes one by one, and everything was so exquisite that Rachel was afraid to even think about the cost of such a meal. Toward the end of dinner, Garrett rose. Mr. Reeves, Madame Linda, Kevin, I'm glad you've accepted my invitation. I would very much like to say that it is an honor to assist you. I respect your hard work and your courage, because you've been through so much. Let me continue to be here for you until my grandfather returns. My father, still weak but trying to look cheerful, smiled. We are grateful, Garrett. I confess I wish I understood your interest, but I can see you're doing it sincerely. Rachel clenched her teeth. She felt a prick of conscience. Her father had spoken so naively, not realizing that the grandson was the man to whom his daughter was formally married. But seeing Garrett's efforts to maintain a good atmosphere, she kept silent. It would do no good to reveal the truth now. After dinner, his mother left to see his father off, and Kevin went to help them. Garrett stayed with Rachel in the dining room. There was silence between them. "Thank you for not telling your father the truth," Garrett said softly. "I know this isn't easy for you." Rachel sighed tiredly. "I think it's best until he gets stronger. I have too many questions. I'm still angry, but I see you trying to help. Maybe when he's fully recovered, we can tell him everything." "I agree," Garrett said. "I promise I won't interfere if you decide to tell him the truth." She nodded and was about to leave, but Garrett reached out and touched her elbow gently. "Are you free tomorrow? I'd like to show you my stable. We have a couple of foals. Maybe a walk would help take your mind off things." For a moment, Rachel imagined walking through the pasture in the sunlight, stroking the horses. A memory of her childhood dreams of veterinary medicine flashed through her mind. She couldn't help but smile lightly. "Okay, I'll go. It's been a long time since I've been around horses." The next day, they went behind the house where there were spacious meadows. The stable was well maintained and large. Several thoroughbreds walked leisurely around the paddock. Garrett pointed to one sprightly colt. "That's Jet. Newly born. Do you want to feed him?" Rachel, forgetting her fears, held out hay to the colt. He touched her hand gently with his lips, and she laughed. Garrett stood beside her and looked at her warmly. "They help me calm down," he said, stroking the colt. "When it's hard, I ride or just feed them." "I understand," she said, running her palm over the soft mane again. "When I was a child, I dreamed of treating animals. I never thought I'd be able to touch such beautiful animals." As they talked, they walked around the corral. Garrett confessed that his grandfather had raised him, but he had died, leaving his grandson with a fortune and doubts. How to find a man who would love his personality, not his wallet? It was the fear of deception that pushed him into the role of the old man. "I'm confused," he said bitterly. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this. I just wanted to find some faith that not everything can be bought." Rachel stood listening to the rustling of the grass. Gradually, the resentment receded. Maybe he was really just looking for trust? That evening, back at the mansion, she realized she no longer felt blind dislike for him. The pain and deception still hurt, but there was hope. What if they could start over? The weather outside was clear, but a whirlwind of feelings swirled in Rachel's soul. It had been a few days since the walk at the stables, and there was a slight but cautious intimacy between her and Garrett. She was already able to call him Garrett instead of Mr. Ford. One morning, Kevin needed to buy some textbooks for his exams. Garrett volunteered to drive his brother to the store. Time passed. They were gone for a long time, and Rachel was afraid that something bad had happened. But in the evening, they returned with a stack of books full of excitement. "I'm sorry we took so long," Garrett said, noticing her worried look. Kevin wanted to go to several stores to find everything he needed. "At least I'm ready for school." "I'm ready for school," his brother exclaimed, hugging the bags. Garrett had been a big help. "Don't be mad, Rach." Rachel breathed out a sigh of relief. Then, when Kevin left for his parents' house, she was alone on the terrace. Garrett quietly walked over and threw a blanket over her shoulders. "I can see you're worried. I'm sorry we didn't give you a heads up about the delay." She nodded, relieved. Thank you for supporting Kevin. He rarely finds common ground with anyone but me. I like your brother. He's smart, Garrett smiled, and your whole family is dear to me. I'm sorry I took such a strange path in the beginning. They were silent for a moment, watching the sun go down. Rachel felt the walls of her distrust shake. Garrett held her hand, and she was in no hurry to pull away. I don't know what happens next yet, she said softly, but I don't think I regret staying. His eyes flashed with happiness. Then I'll try to live up to your trust. In the evening, when they returned to the house, he mentioned that he wanted to improve the guest house and hire people to renovate it. She thanked him. She breathed easier, realizing that maybe life was finally stopping being a series of nightmares. A week later, her father was strong enough to realize the truth. When he heard the story about the old Ford, he was shocked, but not angry. The important thing is that you're happy, daughter, he said quietly as he hugged Rachel. The family accepted Garrett for who he was, young, sincere, and willing to keep them safe. That same day, when the guest house renovations were completed, Garrett apologized to Rachel in front of everyone for the deception. She looked into his eyes and replied, I forgive you. Let it be fair now. They decided to renew their vows, already without the cover-up. The parents and Kevin witnessed a new ceremony where Rachel and Garrett gave each other their word of love and trust. So the poor girl, married out of desperation, found a new life. Now they were moving forward together, leaving lies and pain behind. There was no more secrecy in their home, only family, support, and the quiet hope of a bright future.